Now that we have the tacky adhesive, you can always test it with your finger. See that it's tacky before you get going. Before you stick this down, just kind of hover it over to make sure that you're in the right area, because once it's on there, it's on there. So I'm going to start from this outside and kind of work my way in, placement-wise. I'm going to tack this part down. Press in a bit. And then work my way over here. Just make sure you get a nice press on all the areas. Now you want to make sure that when you're pressing this down, you see how the flashing in the outside area is not stuck to the skin yet? That's exactly what you want, because we're going to go in and do detail, gluing underneath, and then slowly work from the center out, and in as well. So everything's going from the center and working its way towards that flashing. The flashing is again, the most important part of this, because it will give the biggest effect. To give you that really smooth blend, seamless transition into the skin. So start with the center, really stick it in there, make sure it's stuck in, and then we're gonna go in. And for this, I really like to use a tiny brush just to kind of wiggle into the little areas. And I have a little cup with alcohol ready so I can clean in between. And I pre-cut some paper towels so I can use as a cleaner. If you have tweezers, sometimes too, it's nice to use tweezers to hold them back while you're working, but I'm fine with just the hands. So pull back a bit and then just lightly paint in the other areas. And again too, you want to make sure that you're holding this out and allowing it to get tacky before you stick it down. So work in little area by little area. Put a little bit down, wait for it to get tacky. If you have the hairdryer, you can blast it with the hairdryer real quick, then stick it and move on. I only put a thin layer, so it shouldn't take too long for this to dry. If you have a tiny little hand fan, again, like I was saying in the bald cap section, you can hold a little hand fan right there, make it a little bit easier on you. If you have an assistant, you can ask them just to blow the hair dryer. Okay, we're tacky underneath. So slowly, I'm going to press my way up. Stick the remainder. Especially when you're working around the eyes like this, save this inside area for the last bit. That way the adhesive is just on the eye for a shorter amount of time, and they don't have stuff in their eye area for too long. And remember too, the Prosthetic will turn translucent when it's dry. So even if you don't want to test it with your finger to tell if it's dry, you'll see visually it's white when it's wet and clear when it's dry. Okay. Just work in section by section here. And there's no race. It's better to take your time and be really precise about where you're placing everything, and you'll get the best outcome. Trying to rush through the application is typically where issues come into play. You can also use too the back of your brush to press it in there. Make sure it's really adhered in. Okay, now we're going to lightly press this. And a method I like to do when I'm working outward is this roll. I'm just rolling this out with the brush, That way it just flattens it on an even surface. That's a good method too. You can just take this and lightly roll it forward. Same thing, you can just roll this all over. Now sometimes when you get pre-made pieces, they're pre-made and they're a generic piece. So they're not formulated to be specific to your model's face, unless it was pre-made from somewhere custom for you. But anything you order online is a generic face shape. That's something to keep in mind as well. So when you get them, it may be too big for your model's face. It may be too big, it may be too small. It's not always going to have the most perfect size fit because it was not sculpted and made for that person. So you can trim little things. For example, if it were to be going all the way back in the hairline, we would want to trim it down and then we would blend the rest of it in with Bondo to fill in the missing parts. So if something is going back too far, like this right here, if this were to go back any further in here, we will want to trim a little bit of that back. That way it doesn't look like it's going into the hairline. It's close enough that we'll be able to blend around it, but to know for future, you may have to trim some stuff because it's not always going to be perfect. This is my favorite thing to do in FX makeup, is prosthetics. Because you can do a beautiful paint to someone all day long and really change and alter their appearance, but once you add 3D things like this to the skin, it makes such a huge difference to the character, and it's really very transformative. Okay, now that we have most of this outside area, I'm going to fill in a little bit in here. Again, I'm not going to go completely all the way in the eye area yet because I want to wait until the end to limit the time that the adhesive is around the eyes. It is completely safe. Again, both this one and the Telesis are completely safe. They're medical grade adhesives, so they are very safe to be around the eyes. Of course, you don't want to put them in the eyes themselves, but it's safe to be on top of the eye, under the eye, anywhere around the eye area, completely safe for these adhesives to be there. So you don't have to worry about that. Certain ones people may feel sensitive to, like their eyes may water a little bit just because of the fumes or something being nearby there. This doesn't always mean that there's a reaction. And important to note too that skin allergies and skin reactions are different. An allergy actually includes the central nervous system and will have a much more life-threatening effect to the person. As someone who just has a skin irritation, it can just be a cosmetic and a slightly annoying thing as opposed to being interior. So it's important to note the difference between those as well. I, in my time doing makeup, have actually never encountered someone who has had an allergy to Telesis or this Prosade. I've had people be fairly sensitive to spirit gum because it does tend to be a little bit more harsh on the skin and a little bit harder to remove than these, but it's not impossible, but it's fairly rare. Let's give a final push of everything going from the inside out. Make sure it's all really stuck in there before you move to the next step. So now what we're going to do is a tiny little flashing area. So now with the flashing, you want the teeniest little bit of glue, and you're just going to lightly wiggle some underneath. Now you can do what's called a double contact with these prosthetics if you want to. It's one of those personal preference choices at the end of the day. The double contact is putting Prosade on the skin, letting it dry, and also at the same time putting a layer of Prosade on the back of the prosthetic as well and letting that dry. This gives a bit more of a strong bond to the skin, so if you really need something to stay on a very long time, that's a good method to use. Just be aware, make sure you're doing it in an area where there's not a lot of people, where they're not going to bump the table, because you're going to leave that piece laying flat on the table while it dries, and if someone bumps into it and knocks it on the off the table, it's stuck to the ground and you're done, and there goes your piece. So I wouldn't recommend doing the double contact when you're first learning, because it does have a lot of faults to it. But once you're more familiar with it and the application process, it is a really good method to use to actually keep it on a bit longer for you. Now, to get the tiny little flashing areas that I can't reach with my fingers because I don't have fingernails to grab onto with, I'm going to use some flat tweezers and one of these tiny little eyeliner disposable sticks. They have a tiny little point to them, so they make it a little bit easier to get in these tiny areas. Much smaller than the brushes and also the Q-tips. Close your eyes for me. So now I'm going to take this up, wiggle a bit underneath. Careful you're not pulling too hard with the tweezers, because it's such a thin amount. You can stick it on almost immediately and it's okay. So now just go around and spend your time sticking all these little areas down. Great for tiny little detail work and something you can just throw away as opposed to having to clean off like the brush. Notice how the flashing is starting to be stuck down to the end there. And one thing you can do too is this rolling technique. So the rolling technique, basically you take a little bit of adhesive on here, pull the prosthetic back a bit, careful not to grab the hair if you're close to the hair. And what you can do is put it underneath and just roll the adhesive forward with the glue, and then it sticks it down at the same time. If you're able to wiggle it underneath like that, it's a great method because it will just kind of pull it forward and stick it for you. Sometimes with the teeny tiny little edges like this, it's not so easy to get under there. But it is an option. Just check all the areas, make sure that everything is connected. That's just a little piece we can pull off. It was a little bit of an extra. But you do want to make sure this edge is completely glued down before you move on. These are pretty good here. You'll see a lot of them tend to get glued down when you're doing that final last one there. So you might not need to do too much. You can kind of get underneath there and lift it a bit. And then we can go in and get the rest of these eye areas going. So now, you still need a bunch of glue underneath here. What I'm going to do is go back to a cotton bud for this one, a little bit bigger surface. Knowing where it's going to go now. And think of the direction you're moving your tools underneath here too. Like if you're getting close to that edge, make sure you're rolling outwards, not inwards. If you're rolling inwards, you're going to roll the flashing into itself and lose your really smooth blending edge. So if you're rolling the Q-tip, make sure you're always going away from the prosthetic as opposed to going into it. So just gonna flatten the eyebrows down while we're here, since we know we have another piece to put around there. We'll just use this glue to smooth it down while we're in the area. And remember to check in with your model. Make sure they have water, make sure they're happy. If they need a break, let them know. Sometimes they're shy and they don't want to tell you if they need a break, so asking them is always a really nice method. Make sure that they're being taken care of. Okay, now I'm going to gently push outwards and outwards. I need a little bit more glue under there, but instead of the Q-tip, I'm going to go in with our tiny little stick again. And lightly lift up here to get underneath. Again, don't blow on the face. Wave it with your hand or a little hair dryer or a tiny little fan, but never blow onto the face because that is gross. Okay, now that we have this one stuck down, what I'm going to go ahead and do is with a sponge that I'm just going to rip off a bit here. I'm going to stipple a little bit of Prosade around the edges here, just to make sure that they're sealed. This gives you extra durability for it and also softens the edge. Some people really like to use liquid latex at this method. This is okay to do because this is latex, so it will work very well with the other one. I'm not using latex because there are tiny little baby hairs on this area of the face, and also right here we're getting into the hair area, so I'm not going to be putting latex in that area because it will not come out. So Prosade, well, totally fine. But doing a light stipple around the whole outside of that flashing. Make sure that everything is stuck down and ready for the next step. Now, once I stipple around the edges too, I'm going to do a light stipple over the entire prosthetic with the Prosade. Now, this is a step that you don't have to do if you're going to be painting them with Pax paint. So Pax paint, remember, we were talking about in the earlier modules, Pax paint is a specific paint that you can easily make or purchase on your own. Pax paint is a mixture of acrylic paint and Prosade. It's equal parts. So again, easy enough to make on your own, or you can purchase them if you want. Those, you don't need to stipple Prosade around the entire prosthetic if you're going to be using them to paint. I'm not going to be using them to paint because I prefer a few other paints for foam latex. In order to paint with what I'm going to be using, which is anything other than Pax paint, you have to seal the prosthetic, because remember, this is foam under here and it's going to absorb things. Doing a light stipple of Prosade over top of everything will seal it all in. So sealing it will give you a smooth surface to then put any type of paint you want on top of it. So you have options here. Again, if you're using Pax paint has Prosade in it, so you don't need to do a light stipple of Prosade everywhere. But if you're not using Pax paint and you're going to use rubber mask grease, or if you're going to use skin illustrators, which are both things that I'm going to be using for it, you do need to do a stipple over top of everything to completely seal it so nothing breaks the foam down. But stipple on your outside edge first. And you can take some and stipple over the entire piece. You don't need a lot here. And definitely don't do it in a sweep. You want it to keep the texture, because these were all hand sculpted prosthetics and you don't want to lose the beautiful texture and shapes that are inside of here. It's made to look natural, so keep that stippling motion to give it texture so it's not flat. So stipple around the outside, make sure all parts are covered. And then what I'm going to do is just hold the eyelashes down for this part. to make sure that I'm not getting anything in them. It is safe again, it's just not very comfortable. So now, before, she's still keeping her eyes closed. I'm gonna grab this glue real quick. What I'm gonna do is hit this with a hairdryer to speed the process up. And then with our powder that we have and our tiny little brush, this is an optional step. You don't have to powder this before you go in to start painting, but I'm going to powder the inside eye area for her. That way she can open her eye. If you don't powder this inside eye area, the eyelid will actually kind of fold onto itself and stick into the glue, and it's going to be pretty uncomfortable. So I'm just going to powder this area here. That way she's able to open her eyes while we work on the other sides. So a teeny tiny little layer of powder. You'll notice too the powder will change the tone, of course, because it is powder and it's even though there's no color to it, it does have a light white haze that it shows off on top of the Prosthetic. So it will adjust your painting technique a bit, but just taking the powder a little bit and giving a quick little powder here, that way she can safely open her eyes. Go ahead, open your eyes. And it definitely is going to feel a little strange in this eye area because you're not used to something being in your eye area like that. It'll take a bit of getting used to, but it'll get there. Now that you have your first one down, you're going to go ahead and do the exact same thing to the other side. So the next step, once you've applied everything and you've sealed it all with the Prosthetic, is to take some cream Prosthetic, which this is the same cream that was used to make the prosthetic transfers. Has a little bit of a tint to it. And what we're going to do is we're going to use this to help blend these edges. So make sure, again, you seal this very well before you move on. You don't want the product to dry out. So we're just going to use our tongue depressor and some of this prosthetic cream to fill in a bit around the outside of these edges. So we don't need a lot, and this is really just to help make a more seamless transition from prosthetic to skin. And you're kind of just sculpting and filling in the ridges with this. You don't always need to do this or have to do this. Sometimes it depends on the edges. If you're really happy with how the edges look, you don't necessarily need to do it, but I like the little bit of extra security. I just find it gives a little bit more of a believable edge to it. It gives the prosthetic something to kind of seamlessly blend into versus just starting and stopping. And again, too, these are pre-made, mass-produced pieces, which are totally fine and they're beautiful, but they're not made specifically for her face. So it really helps to kind of use this as a sculpting tool to fill in little holes that may be missing. Sometimes too, like in the shipping process, the prosthetic can lose some of those fine edges that you really want. So just use this almost as if it's like a clay, filling in the little ridge. And you notice too, I'm not going super smooth or really far in on the top, just enough to give that little bit of a fill-in so that it looks like a soft transition. Remember, we have all that nice texture on the top of the prosthetic itself, and we're not trying to lose that. So don't take this and really smooth it all over everything. Just use it to lightly blend the edge. You can also use a Q-tip to fill in a bit. I like to extend it out a little bit further in a stippling motion. That way it gives a little bit more texture to the remaining skin. Again, just kind of helps with that seamless transition for you. Because the painting is very important of how you paint the prosthetic, but the application and how you blend the edges is really the base of it being a believable look. If you don't have a really smooth transition from skin to prosthetic, it really can take you out of the look very easily. So spend the time. Same with the bald cap. Having the smooth edge is the most believable thing. So really spend the time sculpting it out until you're happy with how it looks. At the end of the day, you could do a really beautiful paint job on this, but if the edges weren't blended properly, it just kind of kills the whole look. And now this is specifically for foam latex. Again, this is Prosthetic base. So when we get into the silicone, if you need help blending the silicone, what you can use is, if it's encapsulated, you shouldn't really need help in the blending. When they're encapsulated like that, they really blend away fairly well. But you can use some cap plastic that we showed you how to use, how to make your own bald cap. You can use some cap plastic to help blend. You can also do some of that 3rd degree if you need a lot of help with it. Like some silicone mass-produced pieces don't have the encapsulation, so they're really a harsh transition from skin to prosthetic. So actually sculpting a heavy outer layer with that 3rd degree can really give you a huge help in finding the blending edge. At the end of the day too, for this character, texture is good. It's a zombie. I don't know if you've ever seen any zombies with really smooth skin, but this can also help you in blending the seam between 2 prosthetics where they've joined together. So like here, they slightly overlapped. Sometimes you can cut them. This one wasn't so thick that it required cutting, so I'm just gonna fill in that ridge there to give more of a smooth transition. Using this as, again, kind of as just a sculpting medium at this point to keep on the same level. Sometimes if the overlapping is too much, you'll have to cut one, and then after you've cut it, you'll have to fill it in with the Bondo like this still. Just depends on the pieces. They're all different. And again, you will find size-wise, they don't always fit appropriately. So you see how one side kind of shifts up a bit more. That's because of how it fit around her eye, because again, it's not made for her eyes. So you have to find the right base around. You have to find the right blend for it. Again, I'm doing the perimeter, and then I'm going to do the inside eyes last. Actually, you can keep your eyes open if you want. But what I am going to do while I'm doing this blend, because this is going to look like there's nothing there, it to look pretty gross. So while I'm in this blend, I'm just gonna stipple some of this lightly in random areas over there just to give some texture for us. If you have an assistant, one person can work on each side of the face to speed the process up. If you don't have an assistant, just work as fast as you can, but precise. You'll see too, I'm also kind of filling the ridge between these a little bit with this cream, just to give a little bit more blend. We don't want the forehead and this area to be on the same level, but a little bit more of a fill-in, so it's not such a harsh change from one to the other will be nice. Makes it look a bit more believable. Again, just think of these things when you're in your blending stages and stuff like that. Think of how it looks now, but then think of how it's going to look with paint, because we will be painting all of this. Outside edge of whatever you have should always be as thin as possible. Just remember that. Doesn't matter if you're stippling or you're smoothing like that, the outermost edge is always going to be the thinnest part. As you can see, drying the Bondo takes quite some time. So the hairdryer helps immensely to get that cream Prosthetic to dry down because it is very thick. And it's not ready yet because we still see some wet pockets. What I'm gonna do, close your eyes for me, is just put a little dust of powder on her eyelids while the rest of it dries. That way she can open her eyes and doesn't have to worry about anything getting stuck there. Just very lightly on top of there, so that way nothing sticks together. Okay, you can open your eyes. So now we're gonna move on to applying the silicone prosthetics while the rest of that dries down, and then we'll go back for the painting portion. But we at least get some of the way started with the hairdryer so you don't spend as much time waiting for it to dry.